Hello, we're going to talk about a few early flowering perennials. Now, our gardening style is that you have bulk of the flowering later on in the summer, so you're anticipating all the way along until it finally flowers. But we like to have a few early ones just to sort of whet the appetite. And today is May Day. I should be on the parade in Moscow, but I'm not. I'm here in the garden. This is a Geum called Scarlet Tempest. It won a few awards. It's not out that long, and there are Geums that flower for a long time, but they're not particularly persistent. They die away, like Geum chiloensis types. But this one flowers for quite a long time. And after this flushes, I'll probably remove a lot of the old stems, but I mightn't bother. I might just leave it and see what happens, because I'm not that familiar with it. It's the first year it's in. Now you have the same problems. If you look closely, I find the secateurs, when you close the secateurs, it makes a great digging tool. Probably not good for it long term. But anyway, we've loads of creeping buttercup. Looks a bit similar to the leaf of the Geum, so you always have to watch this plant. And now we look at the Geum over here. Here we have another Geum. This one is totally Tangerine. We planted it here about a month ago, so it hasn't really taken off yet. And that's the blue catmint, which will sort of tone it down. And there's the tangerine colour. And it's similar, I think, to the Scarlet Tempest in being long flowering and stuff. Now, it's when we planted it, this aconitum was only above the ground, and it looks like it's sort of fallen in a bit in it. But we'll see what happens. We'll watch this space. Now, early flowering Euphorbias, and the reason I mentioned this Euphorbia, it's called Ascot Rainbow, is, you know, everybody's on about pollinators. You don't need pollinators, and we have to have bees and all the rest of it, which is fair enough. But I have to notice there's the odd bee pollinating that, but it's mostly blue bottles. And I don't think people, like, when they like pollinators, I don't think they sort of being pollinated by blue bottles and cockroaches and stuff. But anyway, as far as I'm concerned, the blue bottles are as entitled as any insect. But it hasn't got the same romanticism, you know, blue bottle pollinated plants as bee pollinated plants. But actually, we had wasps in here a while ago as well. Now, generally, if it's blue bottle pollinated, it means that there's some substance that's being emitted by the plant that attracts blue bottles, which generally is fairly stinky. Now have a look, lovely plant. Bring close, you might actually see a few blue bottles going about their business. There, look. Oh, and there's a bee fly that looks like a bee. Well, see, nature, you have to take the good, you have to take the rough with smooth and the good with the bad. As we're here, just happened to notice this. Tree peony. Chinese tree peony, I'd say. Now, we sell tree peonies in the garden centre, and occasionally you get one that loses its label, so we just bang it in the ground. The thing about them is they don't flower for a long time, so you wouldn't put a lot in your garden, one or two, the odd one, but they are extraordinarily eye-catching. Look how big that is. Now, that's interesting. Very interesting here. Very interesting. This peony, it's a shrubby peony. It's called a tree peony, but it's a shrubby peony. It has wood, but it's grafted onto a herbaceous peony that doesn't have wood. And when you plant them, it's important that you plant them deep enough that the woody part will eventually take over and form its own roots, and eventually the herbaceous part will die away. And here, if we look closely, we'll see there's the herbaceous part trying to make its way up, and it has a much smaller flower. But what we'll do is we'll leave well enough alone. One doesn't seem to be harming the other. But once again, if you buy tree peonies that are grafted on the herbaceous peonies, they have to be planted. That's really important. The woody part has to be planted below the ground to form its own roots, or it will never be any good. I'm going to look at some more plants, but first I'm going to cheat. I'm going to remove this leaf so you can see the flower better. mentioned pulmonarias before, but this one here is particularly good leaf colour, and it's facing north, just in case it got burnt by the sun. And look, it has a very dark background. That nice Japanese maple, the cut leaf one, I think it's called Garnet. Look how perfect the leaves are and how pale they are. But if you look, there's a little bit of reversion, and there's two ways that can happen. One way is that the plant itself can throw out one with more green on it. This one is sort of half and half, and at other times when it sets seed, the seeds will be more towards the normal, getting away from this. So you have to be careful with plants like this to keep them pure. Now the best way to buy a plant like that is in a garden centre where you can actually see it. The funny thing about pulmonarias, all pulmonarias, they hate being in pots, sale pots. They just don't like it. They just go funny. And the funny thing about them is when you take them out of the pot and put them in the ground in the normal earth, within a week they just go back to normal. They just sort of have a thing about pots. That's just pulmonarias. Actually, pulmonary means lung, because that blotchy look, people thought it was something to do with lungs, so they probably took them for their lungs and did no good, but probably no harm. And we look at one last spring flowering plant over here, or maybe two. I just noticed this one. This is the Geranium sylvaticum. They're all self-sown seedlings. I never planted them there, and I just leave them alone. And as I mentioned before, when they finish flowering, I cut them right back because the leaves get tatty, and you will get a second flush of flowers if you do that. Look at the nice silver Elaeagnus. That's Elaeagnus Quicksilver. If you have a large garden in a situation where it's very windy, particularly good. And it has very scented flowers in the spring. Our final early flowering perennial is Thalictrum aquilegifolium, which is the Thalictrum that looks like an aquilegia, which doesn't really help us anymore. But it's lovely, fluffy flower heads, and it will grow almost anywhere. It will grow in shade, and it's seemingly in shade. It doesn't reach for the light. It stays straight. And after flowering, it's got nice foliage, is nice, and it's got a nice bearing. So it's a good garden plant. That's the whitish form, and I selected that myself from a seedling. I just saw that had white flowers on it, and I selected it out. It's normally sort of lilac-y coloured flowers. So anyway, Thalictrum aquilegifolium, well worth having. Not a lot, just a few. Just, as I said before, to whet the appetite for the main flowering period, June, July, August, September. Always have just a harbinger. And anyway, that's us, 1st of May. Gardening. May Day.